Welcome to Directionally Correct, a Penguins podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Matt Clancy, research fellow at Open Philanthropy.
Thanks to our sponsors, One Model. One Model helps people leaders at large organizations make consistently brilliant talent decisions by unlocking the analytical value of the data dispersed across your business. One Model's people analytics platform takes all of the heavy lifting out of data extraction, cleansing, modeling, analytics, and reporting of enterprise workforce data. One Model pioneered people data orchestration and has perfected the ethical use of AI and data science for leaders who need transparent and explainable decision support systems. HR and business teams trust its accurate reports, analyses, and storytelling capabilities. Data scientists, engineers, and people analytics professionals love the combination of governance and flexibility that no other workforce insights platform can provide. To learn more, book a demo at onemodel.co/directionally correct. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization. There was a few students who were in it because they, wanted to do something with their career or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of people were like, well, I'm just going to go live off my daddy's money now.
I'm just getting this finance degree and going to go get an immediate Goldman Sachs high paying job and then go to the golf course and start it all over again.
Exactly.
Have some kids. Matt.
Right. Hey guys.
What's happening, man? You're looking good. You're looking
Thank
good.
you.
Like a haircut.
Looking clipped up. Yeah.
Are you a work at home guy? You did primarily out of the house?
Yeah. I mean, Open Phil is based in San Francisco and I live in Iowa. So I get in to the office a couple times a year, but that's it. I mean, I'm not unusual. Open Phil is more than 50% probably people like me. So
Iowans? Is that 50%? Is that what you mean?
no, I just mean remote. I'm probably the only Iowan.
Yeah. How's that culture clash?
Yeah. No, it's not bad because it's an international kind of, or I don't know, national community, I guess, or work organization. So
what is it? Just out of curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's organization that gives away money is the bottom line.
Wow.
Yeah. So Open Philanthropy. And we have a bunch of programs in different areas, and I run the innovation policy one. So I make grants in that area.
This is where I came across your name. I work with an economist here at my office, and he's like, hey, you got to check out Matt Clancy. He's doing really cool research, essentially aggregating various. I imagine you read a million articles a day, and you just get a really good overview of the entire field. And I found your Substack, Everything Under the Sun, is just wildly impressed by it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that is kind of the idea. So before I was at this job, I was a professor of economics, Iowa State University. And yeah, that was kind of the idea is there's academia is not super well set up to see the forest for the trees. You're kind of rewarded for doing research, which means you got to super specialize and be on this narrow slice, the best in the world at it, and then push it a little bit further. And so I thought maybe there was, plus I really like it, to try and do something different. And so created this Substack, which kind of took off and was really popular. And now it's a website too. And I still spend, even at Open, even though I'm not at a university, I negotiated when I joined, 30% of my time is on this project still. So it's not just a side hustle or something. It's something I spend significant time on.
Did you know Marcus Corday over at Iowa State?
No, I don't think so. What department was he in?
He's probably business, School of Business. Cole, is that right?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's across the street, but didn't connect.
Yeah, I mean, Iowa State's a beautiful, beautiful place. He came in here and he was essentially saying 30% of all Iowa research essentially just made up.
Oh.
You can't trust it. Really coming with a blowtorch.
Of which kind of research?
Iowa psychology.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the field, but there's an article in the Atlantic right now about, fallout from all this fraud. And then this researcher who discovers that one of her co-authors has, been.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah.
We are all over that.
Okay. Yeah.
I've been talking about it for probably a year now, but I did see that one in the Atlantic, and it's just like they keep peeling back the layers of the onion, and it just keeps getting more juicy, and it's just like, yeah, everything is wrong with everything.
Yeah, I mean the twist at the end, right? That the sort of main person there who's leading the investigation is themselves possibly engaged in fraud. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, it's like at a certain point, is it systemic, right? Yeah. Is if everybody's doing it, I don't know. Like I had this conversation with some academics a few years ago, and they were just talking to me pretty openly about kind of how, like, because they were just trying to get published, right? Like their whole goal was to try to get published. And they were just talking very openly about like the incentives and how misaligned they were, and like how they were going to have to like kind of skirt the edges of the rules to get this by. And I was like, what the F are you guys talking about? Like,
yeah,
like I immediately lost respect for them. The thing I realized is, as I reflect on it over time, and as again, a lot of these articles have come out, is, they're talking about like, this is just common practice. Like this isn't like, and so ever since that conversation, I Scott's heard me talk about the open science movement and, and how we need to do pre-publications and all the stuff that's been going on in that space. And it's just like, I don't know, it seems endemic to a lot of the sciences now. And that's really concerning.
Yeah. I mean, I actually looked into this a little bit recently, and, people trying to estimate kind of how prevalent is fraud in different academic fields. And there's kind of like two approaches people have taken, which is like they look at a big set of papers, and then in some disciplines, like you can detect when people are manipulating the images in their, like, biology, they're sort of.
What are you talking about? Like the Stanford president, right?
Yeah. So, people, like, there's this amazing person, Elizabeth Bick, who is like just a gift for spotting sort of fraud in or like article images when they've been doctored, or when they're being duplicated and sort of rotated to disguise it and things like that. And, so she looked at like 20,000 papers, and I think it was something like, 2% of them had one of these kind of images in it. And then there's surveys of academics, like, have you ever done fraud? And some of those find stuff in sort of the same ballpark, where people say like, well, 2% of people will say they've done something like that. But you never know if that's like those could both be underestimates, right? Because it's just this one kind of fraud in one case. It's like this images that you detect. And then in the other case, it's anybody who feels comfortable admitting in an anonymous survey that they did this. So
it takes a special kind of person to like fabricate their data and be like, I'm going to do some sweet data viz here. All right.
Yeah.
You're really going to like showcase this.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, coming back to your Substack for a second. So I publish every so often an article or two on Substack, and I looked through yours earlier today, and I was like, oh my God, I suck so bad. Because like the quality of your work is just phenomenal. And so I guess the question, and actually the most impressive part to me was it covered such a variety of different topics that seemed somewhat non-related. And so I'm like, this guy just knows everything about everything. And it is called Everything Under the Sun. I know, no pun intended there. But how do you, this is a dumb question, how do you do that? Like, how do you know everything under the sun, and how is it so technically oriented?
All right. So first correction, it's called New Things Under the Sun. It's like a pun on this old biblical verse, like there is no new thing under the sun. And so it's supposed to be about innovation. And it's kind of like a cheeky thing about these are new things under the sun. And yeah, how does it? So, I did a PhD in economics. This was sort of my specialty, the economics of science and innovation. I finished in 2015. I was always really interested in like making connections between distant stuff. So one of my two of my dissertation papers were about that idea, like understanding innovation as when you spot a connection between previously unconnected comments or concepts. And so I think for a long time, I just thought it was valuable to read widely for that reason, because maybe you spot something. And then when I started the Substack, I had been reading a lot for a long time, and I had sort of taken notes on it. And so I think that helped. And as for why it jumps around, I think that that's to keep it interesting for readers and for me, basically.
Yeah.
And also because I sort of have this view that maybe you'll see something valuable if you have that approach that other people are missing. I don't know if I have, but that was the theory anyway.
We're reaching a point where like a lot of organizations are mandating return to office. Like we had this like 4-year period, whereas either, please don't come in, all the way to like, hey, we're kind of encouraging to come in, and now you definitely have to come in. What does the research actually say about how that's going to impact innovation overall?
Yeah, so this is an area I was interested in for a long time, even before COVID, because I live in Iowa, which is not like in the center of innovation and frontier stuff. So I was always interested in how connected can you be remotely. And I think that there's kind of different factors that pull in different directions. So I think it's easy to think of the things why it would be good to have people return to the office. You have these serendipitous water cooler conversations where two people like make these connections between ideas they didn't expect because one person in the office knows something and another person doesn't. And there is research kind of documenting stuff like that. So, they've done studies on academics, for example, and when two academics collaborate, what's the probability that one of those guys goes on to work on a new topic afterwards, after their collaboration? So maybe they learned something from their peer. And that's more likely if they collaborate on an article and they're based in the same place than if they're at distant places.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other research about, if I cite a paper that is kind of a weird paper for me to cite, like it's not just standard, in my field, it's more likely that that paper is by somebody in my university. And so that's one of the advantages of like bringing people into the office. A second advantage is that it maybe is easier to just work together on projects that are sort of like
that collaborative demand.
Exactly, like whiteboard type stuff. I don't know that literature as well, but the kind of stuff that I've reviewing a lot of this emphasizes that in person is really good for introducing people to each other who don't know each other. But then with modern technology, it's not as hard as it used to be to maintain relationships with people once you've had that kind of first connection, even at a distance. So it's not easy to see among people who already know each other, that their ability to collaborate effectively declines noticeably at a distance. So
I think that's the rub, right? Where people say like they get shit mad. Like I am fine working at home. I know all these people. I can just Zoom them in. I don't have to like put on pants today. And like they essentially say like I don't need to come into the office, but there's subtle differences in how people interact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you certainly, if you're going to have everybody work from home, you certainly want to do something to make those kind of connections that would happen in the office happen. You don't want to just like let everybody's network ossify and nobody's making new connections anymore. And then as people leave, your network sort of actually starts to shrink, maybe.
Siloed. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that COVID showed that those kind of concerns were real. Like there was a famous study of sort of Microsoft employees, and when they went remotely, they just were much more likely to communicate with people they already knew and so forth. So, our org is mostly remote, and we have like 4 weeks a year that are coordinated for people to come into the office and try to all be there at the same time, so that it's like a way to, to
be intentional about collaborating, get together.
But as I was saying, there's actually there's factors that make it valuable to be in person, and then there's other factors that make it valuable to be able to work remotely. And I think the chief one is just about recruiting. So if you have to recruit locally, you are limited to who's in your local labor market, or you have to entice somebody to move. And if you are able to hire remotely, you can hire people who are the best at that position in the world. And it's a trade-off, right? Like maybe they're 90% as effective as if they're in the office, but if they're, 20% better, then maybe you will take that trade. And it's kind of interesting, like academia and in innovation in general, so among academics and inventors, the share of papers or patents that are developed by geographically distributed teams is this like continually marching up. And I think that's all about this. We need the specialist guy who knows about this one niche thing, and he doesn't work here. So we're going to, fly out there and have a weekend retreat and then keep up with Zoom and stuff like that.
One of the things I think that you pointed out about, remote versus moving people cross country is I think one of the things that was lost during COVID is prior to COVID times, organizations spent hefty sums of money moving people around or doing, offsites or what have you to make sure that you had the people that you want to be in a physical location, in the physical location with one another. And then they didn't have to pay for that kind of stuff for like 2 years. And so that got taken as a line item out of their budgets. But then they came on the other side. Well, it's like, we want to have all the same collaboration in-person time, but we're just not going to pay you to move cross country, or we're not going to pay for those offsites anymore. And it's like, well, that's not going to work. And so I think the idea has reverted back to the mean, but the budget to do so hasn't gone along correspondingly. And I think that is a healthy tension, as well as just the in-person remote tension that's going on at the same time. I don't know, are you seeing that, Matt, at all?
That's tough for me to, like, I haven't seen papers, for example, documenting or like looking into it. Not that it doesn't happen. It's not like they don't find that when they look. It's just I haven't seen papers that have looked at that particular question. And then in my personal experience, Open Phil is generous in helping people travel to the
look at
weekly reports. I know they take care of us. But yeah, I think the travel is an interesting thing that often I feel like it's funny how it kind of got left out of the discussion. I think of the value of being in the office is like, well, you might be more productive, but there's also like, you might spend an extra, it's kind of like extending your workday by an extra, however long you commute, which could be, an hour a day for people.
Totally.
And that's sort of never counted in these papers as like a cost of, it's the productivity while you're in the office, and the time that you're not in the office, you're sort of, it doesn't exist in some sense.
We definitely hear this. That's one of the main complaints. Got to get up earlier. You got to I don't know, shower.
Right.
You got to come home. But I guess the flip side is that when you leave the office, your day is kind of done at that point, right? Yeah. There's no just kind of like this like weird sort of fringe bleed into the evening sort of situation.
Yeah, and I think in the early days of COVID, when everyone was suddenly trying remote work for the first time, or at least a lot of people were, this was like a real focus of a lot of studies, just sort of documenting this bleed out and the shifting of when people would work. And, it can have advantages. Like, I think there's some study, I don't remember the name of it, about like the number of people playing golf during the workday went up dramatically during COVID, but then some of these other studies document people working like after 8:00 for an hour and answering emails and things like that. So maybe they're shifting time or maybe they're taking advantage of a difficulty being held accountable in some workplaces.
I'm going to blame Cole. Cole's the one keeping the golf open.
Well, it was like it became impossible to get a tea time after COVID. Because everybody was out there doing it. I'm like, do you guys work? Like, what? It actually created a lot of personal resentment for me, is how many people, were just like in the middle of the day, just out there like, where does your job's paying you? Right? Like, I don't know. That really kind of chafed me a little bit. But I wanted to come back. Matt, you're doing a lot of research on innovation. Like that's clearly kind of a theme in terms of what you're doing. And we've been talking a lot about AI. Mm-hmm. And what its impacts are going to be. Can AI innovate things on its own without pre-human based direction? Or how soon will that happen? Or just what are your thoughts in general?
Yeah, I think it's not there yet where it can do interesting, important stuff with no human in the loop, I would say. It's really interesting. So this is an area that's moving so fast that I feel like it's kind of breaking our traditional research ecosystem, where economists study something and it takes a year or two to study it, and then they write the paper, and so it's like 4 or 5 years behind when the events happened that you sort of see the paper in a journal. And reading about 4 or 5 years ago, it was like before GPT-3, I think, right? Like this is back when these AIs could do very little. And so with the sort of, that's been a challenge, I think, is like assessing how good this stuff is, given that just in the last 2 years, it's become a lot more capable. One really nice study about this that everyone's been talking about in the last couple of weeks is about a kind of a large material company that develops like complex materials. And they did like a nice randomized control trial internally in their org where they gave some of their teams access to AI to help them design new materials and others didn't. And it seems like it really helped. Like the teams that had access produced like 40% more sort of new materials discovered. They're filing patents for them. They're turning them into products, things like that. But the humans stayed in the loop. And one thing that's really neat about the study is they have, in this company, people kept really close logs on how they use their time. And so you can kind of see how their time shifted. And it went from, they basically handed off all of the sort of ideation to the machines and took on a lot bigger role in like evaluation. So the machines, this is a 2022 era AI, would spit out a bunch of sort of ideas for, here's how you could, organize molecules to have a structure that has these kinds of properties. And then they would evaluate what seemed feasible and what didn't, because the AI doesn't actually have, it's sort of pattern matching. It doesn't necessarily have a deep understanding of physical laws and so forth. So that's one example.
I worry about just like human brain rot from this sort of stuff. Like I catch myself doing the same thing. Like my best friend is my GPT. Right. Yeah. It's my favorite coworker, as it were. Right. And like, I find myself doing the same thing. Like, oh, you come up with ideas and I will vet them. And then you become like essentially like a middle manager at some point.
No, I think this is actually going to be like the next big thing people worry about in this field.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like even in this paper that I'm talking about, they find that, some people are really good at evaluating the ideas of the AI and other people are not. And it's sort of, my reading of it is the people who are really good at evaluating the ideas are the people who had experience previously doing what the AI did. And, they kind of like, they used to come up with brainstorm ideas and they have good intuitions for what's a good idea versus a bad one. But they probably developed all that intuition through doing the work that the AI is now doing. And, you can see the same thing at a lot more like mundane level at school, right? Like if a GPT can write your essay, do you really learn how to write, structure your arguments, think carefully, all that stuff. And yeah,
it's like driving like an automatic car. Like I know very few people that can drive a manual transmission anymore. Like why would you? Right? Like everything, it's probably hard to get a manual transmission.
But it's tricky because like in some sense, I don't know how to drive a manual transmission and it hasn't held me back in life, really.
Exactly. No need.
But if I'm evaluating the output of a model and having done that work myself, it makes me a very good evaluator. Then, you worry about people who don't have that experience. They don't have any training of going through what it's like to write an essay yourself and developing taste maybe or so on. And I was talking to some economists too about like writing theory papers now. You can ask the latest models to do a lot of the math and, it's kind of like a superpowered calculator. And I guess people have always been worried about calculators eroding your skills, but it's the kind of thing where like they would say, I would now prefer to work with this than a grad student to do certain kinds of proofs and things. And, where does the grad student then get the sort of mentorship and experience if people are not interested in working with them?
We've seen some other like really interesting research. Essentially, like high skilled workers and low skilled workers are really effective at using sort of like these augmented assistants. But it's like those intermediate level people with like sort of like modest skills that are perhaps too much hubris to use these additional devices. They really fail, right? They don't get an performance boost at all.
That's interesting. I would imagine it's sort of like if you're middle skill, then you're like kind of in the sweet spot where an AI can do what you do pretty well. Maybe you're thinking differently in terms of like augmenting me, and I'm thinking more of like it replacing
I'm thinking if you're middle skilled, like, it could boost you up. Just like a automatic transmission can make you a better driver, right?
Got it.
Yeah. I'm feeling very middle skilled right now. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet spot.
I think that like different papers have found different things on this. So some of them, I've definitely seen the papers you're talking about where like middle or lower skilled people benefit a lot from these things, but people who are the best, they can't learn anything from how to write better code, for example, from an LLM that's really good at coding. But then I've also seen papers like this one about the material science company where it was sort of the people who are already best at their jobs had their performance boosted by this because of this ability to evaluate the AI and work complementary with it was disproportionately favored by them.
So there's a guy named Balaji Srinivasan who popularized this concept of the internet just creates variance. Right. And so, more people might become idiots, but some people become superhuman intelligent because of the variance that's created. Mm-hmm. And I think AI is just a continuation of that. It's going to create even more variance where some people, you always heard about like the 10x engineer and the 100x engineer. Maybe it's going to create the 1000x or the millionx engineer, but also it might create it to where, 99.9% of people don't know how to write.
Yeah.
And that could be, the variance that's created from this. And I think the bigger question that what we're really asking is what is lost in that scenario? Like if you don't know how to drive an auto or a standard, shifting car anymore, what is lost? If the United States doesn't know how to manufacture things anymore because all the manufacturing is overseas, what is lost? If kids don't know how to write an essay anymore, what is actually lost from that if they can just type in a few prompts and then that writes the perfect essay? Like what is lost in this scenario?
Yeah, I think it becomes like, are those things that are lost like manual transmission, or are they these kind of, I think the danger zone is that there's skills that are valuable, but we're used to living in a world where being only okay at them still produced enough value to pay you to do them. And then that gave you an opportunity to develop those skills. Yeah. Like, if you're an artist and you're competing with, and you're just starting out, it'd be really hard to compete and sell your paintings, I guess, or your images when people can just use a model to make images that are better than you. But that's not going to create a career path that allows you to develop your skill and then become eventually better perhaps than these things. So I think, that's the danger, is things that are on this path where you need to have like a period of okay is good enough to keep doing it. Like you can support that career. And, we have things like high schools where we train people to write things that are not actually good enough to do economic value. Like people are not paying high schoolers for their essays, but maybe we'll have to have that kind of training system for just way more things. But maybe maybe the economics of that don't work out. So I don't know. It's an interesting future.
I think you alluded to it. Like on one hand, you could have like someone produce an essay in ChatGPT, but then have ChatGPT read it back to you, like, and summarize that essay. There's no real gain there. Mm-hmm. But there's other things that go along with learning how to construct an argument and like lay out your plan, et cetera. It's really just like critical thinking. And if like that gets eroded, we're in real trouble.
Yeah. I mean, this reminds me of like the debate about when we moved to sort of automation of like manufacturing instead of having these artisanal people who had these skill sets to make, furniture that had features that you don't see in mass-produced furniture. And the mass-produced furniture is cheaper, but it's not as high quality, perhaps, along some dimensions. And, in some sense, yeah, there's kind of a substitution of like high-quality furniture is maybe still available to a very small set of people who pay a high premium for it, but most people have access to more furniture, but it's just not as good.
Well, that's like the whole premise of higher variance. Mm-hmm. You have a small number that have extremely high quality, and then a long tail of just a bunch of shitty IKEA furniture that no one ever wanted. But
shout out to IKEA.
It's not so bad.
Sorry, IKEA. My apologies. Well, do you want to do a little bit of confusion matrix, Matt?
Happy to learn what it is.
The confusion matrix. Real quick, we wanted to say thanks again to One Model, the AI and people analytics pioneer, for sponsoring the episode. And now back to the Confusion Matrix.
Both of you have just like killer office setups. I need to like emulate you guys.
Well, nothing's stopping you.
I have terrible internet at the house. There is like a technical tax that needs to be paid rather. So when this pod's released, we're going to be coming up on the Christmas holidays. Are you a Christmas celebrator, Matt?
I am.
Okay. Do you love it? Like you get way into it?
I think, we don't put big lights up in the house, but we obviously have a tree, and I have 3 kids, and they love Christmas and all that stuff.
Magical. I bet Iowa's actually magical at Christmas time.
It can be. Yeah. You can get nice snow.
All right. So I have 5 questions for you, loosely based on the Big 5 personality inventory, all about Christmas. It's just a chance to talk and get to know you. All right. Play along if you want to guess the construct of interest as well. Okay, Matt. Are you into giving exotic gifts, like atypical gifts to other folks?
I think, if you could think of something that's atypical, I'd be excited about it, but it's hard work. And I don't think I put in I don't think I do enough work to deliver on a lot of people, but when you can do it, it's great.
It is really wild. Essentially, we're just like sending Amazon gifts to each other, right? Like at some point, like, what do you want from Amazon? Here, I just seeing that.
I love that the question was about openness to experience, but it became about conscientiousness. It's a little hard. I mean, I don't know. But I know, Scott, that you love giving exotic gifts, so you're definitely high in that.
Yeah, I guess so.
I used to make like a music playlist for people in my family, and I would take a lot of pride into finding stuff that I didn't think they would know in that. But that got hard too.
What would give us some like a hipster jam, some like under the ground radar that you love?
It's been a long time since I've done it, or at least a few years. What are some hipster jams that are under that they would like that are on there? Geez, I don't even know. Like,
I'm putting you on the spot. I apologize here.
I know, you can watch me scroll through my phone or something.
One of my favorite jokes is like if you're driving on the highway and like there's a car on fire on the side of the road, be like, dude, they listened to my mixtape. Finally, it's like a car caught on fire. All right. When you're like giving gifts, assuming that you wrap them, do you make sure it's like super precise and like it looks like super good, or is it just kind of like we'll throw it in a bag?
I'm a wrapper. I won't put. I mean, I'll use bags occasionally, but I think most things I wrap. Santa wraps presents at our house, and they have to have a certain level of quality for that. I think, you can't get away with sloppy work there.
I mean, both of y'all have kids at the house. Are y'all elf on the shelf people? Like terrorize the kid for a little while?
No,
I do not believe in the surveillance state that we're trying to condone.
Same. Also, it's one of those things where it's a lot of work, and I didn't grow up with it, and so it's sort of unnatural, and I don't need to do it, I guess.
What about you, Cole? Like, you a tight gift guy, or like you just leave that up to Santa, let someone else outsource it?
You're gonna learn how much of a shitty person I am through this answer. Like, I literally give my spouse money to buy gifts for everybody, including themselves. I don't do any of this stuff. Like, I'm just gift giving in any context. I don't like birthdays. I don't mind like the principle behind it. Like, I love other people receiving things that I give. I just the process of it I hate.
Are y'all into like big get-togethers, like Home Alone? There's like 12 people in the house. That's how they lost Kevin. Or like smaller sort of, I can't think of a pop culture small get-together. Tiny Tim and his little family getting together.
I like a big get-together. That's how I grew up. Go over to Grandma's house, and there'd be so many people by the end when people started getting married and have kids of their own that people were like worried about the structural integrity of like the floors. So
yeah, you have branch offs, like where like the one big thing became smaller things just out of necessity. I totally agree, Matt. I love that kind of stuff.
I wish I grew up in this sort of situation. I have a very small family, and I never it is so foreign to me to see 45 people get together on the Hallmark Channel.
I mean, 45 people. Yeah, that was me getting together.
Yeah.
Christmas Eve every year.
That's a lot of gifts. Of gifts.
So we did we did like a kind of a white elephant gift thing where everybody brings one gift for the pool, and then there's a competition over them.
You're like, here's my mixtape.
Exactly.
Check it out.
And if it's like every Hallmark movie, the lonely single girl comes back for Christmas with her family, and then the guy who wasn't into her in high school was recently widowed now has pursued an interest in her for the first time, and it's about her new candle making business and how he really has found the candle making to be enlightening. They fall in love. The end. There you go. I ruined it for you.
Shout out to Holiday in Handcuffs, 2009. Melissa Joan Hart and AC Slater from Saved by the Bell. That's some solid stuff, baby.
I'll have to watch
Check that one out. Holiday in Handcuffs. It's a must see. We probably already covered this. Like, do you worry about the perfect gift? Trying to get like, do you wrap yourself up in knots?
I mean, I think that like it's hard. There's like two things. There's like my spouse, and where we both have like enough. We're doing well enough that if you really want something at any point in the year, you know,
right,
you probably can get it. And if you don't get it, it's because it's expensive, and then it's hard to make like the unilateral Christmas decision. Like, we're spending our money on this now for you, you know. And then there's the kids where like they are in the opposite situation where like they're very much on the mercy. They can't afford to get the things they really want, and so for them, I think we do a pretty good job. But it's a little bit of like, you know, they give us a list of things, and you know, there's not this careful figuring out of what would exactly match their personality or anything.
There's like a technology play here. It's like back in the day when like things had to be like handcrafted. It would take forever to be expensive, and like you took care of your things. Now everything's just like cheap plastic from China, right? Like you just buy it whenever. It doesn't really matter.
Just fills up landfills eventually. Yeah.
Dude, you go like the like aisles in Target, and you'll be like, everything in here is just going straight to landfill. Like, it's like stuffed animals, and you're like, there's no home for this. I have no idea what happens to this stuff.
So depressing. We have like we take, you know, kids to fast food places, and they get the Happy Meal stuff, and then I think I just put out a garbage bag full of like Happy Meal toys that have accumulated over like the last 5 years, if they're listening.
Those people who hand out flyers on the side of the road, it's like, oh, you just give this to me to put into the trash can. Thank you.
Just put that right in the gutter. Yeah. Last one. Like, we're coming up on it. Holidays are stressful times. Do you stress about this? Or do you just like, whatever, we'll let it happen?
I don't think I'm too stressed about it. It's a little stressful. You know, there's some crunch times where you have to figure out how to get things. But like, we usually take time off around the holidays, and yeah, it's I'd say net relaxing, although there's like some parts that are stressful. Yeah,
there should be a little tension, right? Like, you can't just like leave your Christmas lights on the house all year.
That's right.
Right, and just be like, we're rolling into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Scott? How do you approach the holidays?
Holidays, it's a magical time. Give me your Amazon wish list, and we'll take care of it.
So you get them to do all the work for you.
We'll throw money at it. Well, if someone doesn't have like a discernible like interest, eventually like one will be assigned to them. So it's like, you don't drink, you don't, you know, I don't know, golf.
You get pigeonholed.
All of a sudden you're collecting porcelain cows. That's what I'm deciding for you, right? So
yeah, you're gonna get one for every holiday for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
If you don't have a collection yet, you will by the end of this.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do some nerdery. The nerdery. I think the one about collaboration, Scott, might be a good one per the conversation we were having from earlier. Do you want to go there first?
Yeah, this is a really cool study, and I'd love to get Matt's thoughts on this sort of thing. Collaboration, physical proximity, and serendipitous encounters, avoiding collaboration in the collaborative building. So a lot of companies have these sort of like open office sort of buildings where, you know, you'd expect that the layouts would encourage serendipitous connections, you know, people to meet one another, but they rarely like really show the benefits. So the authors, really cool study. So they went to a collaborative building, some sort of like specifically designed to encourage these sort of connections. They sat there kind of like Jane Goodall. They, you know, monitored everyone in the office. They interviewed several folks and just kind of tried to discern like how they are avoiding each other. And essentially developing serendipitous connections was exceedingly rare due to 4 tactics that folks would employ. Like, one is focusing on existing connections, so only talking to those people that you already know. Reinforcing group boundaries, so failing to invite other people to, say, like, sit at your lunch table while you're eating, this sort of thing. Enacting legacy policies, so essentially claiming like, well, that group just does things different than us, or like they're on a different financial system. And minimizing social interactions, that's your typical just put on your headphones sort of stuff. But for those rare few scientists who did overcome this, they simply just said hello to folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just were open to meeting people.
Yeah, so this reminds me of like a study about a startup accelerator where they had a bunch of different startup teams. I think this was like some kind of short-term accelerator thing. So it wasn't like just like their permanent home. It was like they were put together for a period of time. And this was based in India. And they kind of wanted to see, who do people interact with? Who do they meet? Who are their connections? And the people who came in already knowing people, came out essentially knowing fewer people than the people who didn't know anybody going in. And it was because they just disproportionately relied on their pre-existing ties and didn't sort of reach out, or they weren't forced to reach out and meet new people. So that matches what I've heard.
I think you'd posted an article, I'll attribute to you anyway, of folks going to, like, say, conferences or like these sort of like training seminars.
Yeah.
If they already knew people going in, they met fewer people, but people that don't know anybody were much more open and developed new connections overall.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but like this reminds me of a thing I've often wondered about is like, if you were to design a conference and you just want to maximize how many people you can meet, I think actually you might have more luck with like a smaller conference than a bigger one. And because if you have a big conference, there's more likelihood that people you already know are going to be there. And then you can kind of just cluster together. You can get like 10 people to go out that you already know for drinks. And if you're in a small conference, you might know a few people, but you don't have enough to just fill your weekend getting to chatting with the people you already know.
Well, I think it goes back to all that paradox of choice. If you have like 3 choices of people to talk to, you're more likely to talk to somebody than if you have 1,000 people to choose from. And so you're just going to be paralyzed by it. But the thing I liked about the article, Scott, is I kept thinking this as I was looking through it, is like, you can't make me. Right? Like the organization is saying, we're going to create this environment and we're going to force you to sit in it. And it's going to make you collaborate. It's going to make you, serendipitously run into somebody else. And the employees are saying, we've got these 4 strategies that say, you can't make me.
So another thing that like I've always thought interesting about this whole line of work is it's like a pretty consistent finding that once you're even a little bit far away from somebody, so I think it's like 25 meters or something, it's like they might as well like be remote working, because like your probability of talking to people who are like quite close to you is significantly elevated if you're in the same place. But you can't really actually scale that as much as you think. Like you think, you can.
That's really wild. Like, I mean, if they're not in that immediately area, I often wonder about like, Matt, you don't know me that well, but I will talk to anybody at any time about anything. And I purposely sit myself next to the bathroom here at the office. And people hate me because I'm like, hey, what's up? Like right when they're going to go pee or whatever. And like, oh shit, he's here again, sort of thing. But while the proximity surely matters, like you've also posted like really interesting like naturalistic studies of, say, asbestos, like throws 2 different science departments together, and I can't remember the exact stats, but it's like 2 to 5x co-publication rate than you would expect at the rest of the campus.
Yeah, that's a really interesting study where they were like removing asbestos, so they moved all the labs around. It's in France, and as you said, like if you get moved together, you're a lot more likely to collaborate. But the thing that's interesting is when you move them apart, they don't actually get less likely to collaborate. And that gets back to that idea that like this is great for like meeting people. Yeah. But then like once you're apart, and I think it's important to remember these guys are still all in the same like university campus. So it's not like if I meet somebody and we become friends and then we decide we're going to collaborate on a project, but years later we're now on opposite ends of the campus, it's not that hard for us to like meet up for lunch and do all that stuff.
Well, can I pick on this for a second? Because this gets to kind of the axe I have to grind with companies versus the example you used. is the example you used was like, again, the asbestos could be another argument for this is just a serendipitous happening where the teams got moved together. It was completely random. It wasn't like strategically created. The reason why organizations are doing this usually isn't to increase collaboration. That's the guise they're putting on it. It's usually to reduce the real estate footprint and save money, right? And employees are wise to that, right? And so I think, again, back to my point about you can't make me, is organizations are saying, hey, you know how you used to have a little bit of private space that was like yours? Well, you can't have that anymore. Now your private space is everyone's public space, and we're just going to cram as many of you in as possible. And so people are saying, well, I'm rightfully going to put up my mental and my social walls because you took away my actual walls, right? And so there's a part of this where it's like, if you really want to create collaboration, you need to incentivize collaboration or incentivize the serendipitous connections, but don't force it because you actually have an ulterior motive. That is where I come down, like the university example versus the organizational example, I think are qualitatively different in that regard.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting how often, I get the sense too that a lot of return to office rhetoric is kind of like, motivated reasoning. Like that's not really why we want you to return to office. It's because often it's like maybe we don't have systems in place to monitor that you're really doing work, and we just don't trust you, and we don't have a high trust culture. So we want everyone to be sort of in a place, and the serendipity line is like a useful, fig leaf about why we're asking everyone to come back to the office. Like, there's a study that people are tweeting about this morning about that I think is interesting because I haven't read the study, so I'm going off of a hot take tweet, I guess. But it was like monitoring software engineers and their productivity, and it looks at sort of their GitHub commits as a way to measure how productive they are. And the people who are remotely working are both more likely to be like 5X engineers and more likely to be what they called like ghost engineers who basically do not work. And so again, that's, I guess, that high variance thing. But, one response to that is sort of like, well, the org just needs to do a better job of monitoring people's GitHub commits. Like if these researchers can do something like this, why is this an issue that the firm has never thought about?
No, I love this point, Matt. Yeah. And the thing is like organizations try to create a singular policy for one camp or the other camp. They either say, we're all 5X engineers now, clearly, and so here's our policy, or we're all deadbeats who don't work at all, so here's our policy. And it's like, how about you again, use some organizational science to show that we have a different policy per the type of performance that we're seeing.
Yeah. The other thing I think is interesting is like ways to try to create serendipity or new connections among kind of remote employees. So I think we connected because I don't know if you went down this route, but I have like on my website like a button to like book virtual coffee with me.
Yeah.
And like that's an intentional choice because I'm based in Iowa and I value this sort of serendipity stuff. And I have this kind of public internet profile through writing the Substack. So it is likely that people might stumble upon this virtual coffee button. But anyway, that's like, you can do other things too. Our org has like this, you can sign up to be randomly matched with people to have like remote virtual donut coffee, once every 2 weeks or something.
Well, Matt, you don't know how many people are going to virtually book coffee with you now because this podcast. So you may regret that decision.
Remove that button.
I do have it set up so that you can only book one per day. So I can't get overwhelmed. Like I can only do one per day.
There are. We can move on, but like I think that moving forward, like FaceTime with the boss is never going to go away, as well as like just the home office bias. I don't think we're ever going to get away from that.
Yeah. Well, I got an article here since we're moving on to about exit surveys versus engagement surveys, and so there's been kind of this question as old as time is, are people honestly responding to the surveys that organizations provide? And so some people have argued, well, exit surveys, because there's no consequences anymore, people are being more accurate in their responses, especially about politically engaged topics like, do I like my manager? Do I not like my manager? And I would be more afraid to share that on an engagement survey because it might come back to haunt me versus an exit survey. Well, they can't do anything to me more because I don't work here. And friend of the podcast, Ludic Stellick. And by the way, Ludic, I need to reach out. We haven't connected in a while, so I'll be reaching out to you. Maybe if you put a book a coffee time on your LinkedIn, I'll book some coffee. But he did some research to show that actually that's really not true. And so what they did is they time lagged the number of months between when somebody took an engagement survey and quitting and when they took the exit survey. Presumably the exit survey came right after they quit or right before they quit. And what they found is essentially the number of months away an engagement survey was they were less likely to be an accurate prediction of them leaving in terms of the relationship with their manager. But if the exit or the engagement survey was right around the time the person left, their responses were almost identical to the exit survey responses. So I thought this was an interesting finding. How do you guys react to this? And are there other kind of implications you see in terms of other research along these lines?
It's like I've been thinking about this question of like how prevalent is scientific fraud and wondering if people are underreporting when they're, doing these anonymous surveys. And now I'm wondering if you could learn something by surveying retirees basically, or people who are maybe, less worried about being caught out.
Yeah. Well, I love why, like, can we just like completely pivot on this for a second? Because I don't feel like we got to squeeze enough juice out of the lemon earlier on the scientific fraud point. Do you think, like, why is it so prevalent? And again, my perspective has always been it's just the incentives. There's a limited number of top tier journals. There's so many academics out there. It's so competitive to publish in them. And frankly, a lot of science has already been conducted over the last 100 years. So the chances that you're going to find something new are quite low. Is it all just incentives as to why this is happening, or are academics just bad people?
I think the academics are people, and there's good and bad people. I think the incentives, like I'm an economist, we really focus on the incentives. And I think there's certainly, like you say, and there are these sort of interesting traps fields can get into where the Atlantic article alludes to one of these, where sort of like you're in a dynamic in, I think it was business psychology there. They kind of argued where everybody's doing fraud. And so if you don't do fraud, you're at a real disadvantage. I mean, fraud is maybe too strong a word for what a lot of people do. Like it's not often necessarily like literally making up data, but often it's
cutting corners
on your research. And, you didn't find the relationship.
Harking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all the p hacking type stuff, I think that's probably pretty common, like p hacking type stuff. And another kind of interesting trap you can get into is if there's a field where it's just really hard to do compelling work. Like you could argue a lot of economics has this problem where like measuring stuff is harder and so forth. And then if measuring stuff is really hard because you don't have like a good measure of like innovation, for example, like you can use patents to measure innovation, but they are really imperfect and so forth. Then that means a lot of the time your research doesn't find anything because it's just the data is too noisy.
Yeah.
And then that means, it's very easy to, it can be hard to sort of get a finding the credible way, but also if you don't get the result you expect, so you kind of expect there to be a positive relationship, but you don't see it, in some sense, you should take that as like a signal. Maybe there's nothing there, but maybe you say, well, it's a lot of noise in the data. So like I'll just try again. And you don't sort of publish it as a null result that people say, oh, maybe there's actually nothing here. You just kind of bury it because you assume it's just
file drawer.
Yeah.
Issue.
But yeah, you wonder if the file drawer is a bigger problem in fields where it's hard to, like the data is really noisy. Like if you found a null result in physics, for example, that everyone expects that, there's going to be we have a really good theoretical physics explanation. And we looked and we actually didn't see something, like we couldn't detect the Higgs boson. It's not where we thought it would be. You'd publish that and that'd be exciting. But in other fields, you didn't find what you thought you'd see. And you're like, well, we'll just put that in the file drawer because it's probably the data was too noisy to detect it. And we should just try again.
Engineers like claiming that we shouldn't, get anything out that isn't like 0.8, 0.9 effect size. Like we're trying to predict humans. Like you're trying to predict a steel beam.
Yeah.
This is different, man.
Yeah.
Totally
Exactly.
different.
Exactly. But then that lets that makes it harder to sort of build up the evidence base in the fields that sort of need it the most,
Yeah.
which is the trap.
Especially when you look over and your coworker is like, "What's up?" Like raining money and like all the publications everywhere.
Yeah, and the other thing is like if it's a really hard field to do work in, then that means you might need like giant samples, and then that becomes expensive, and it's just it gets harder to learn and all sorts of, so that like you get stuck in that area without knowing much, or you make really slow progress anyway.
Like on this study specifically, I don't think there's like a big mystery here. It's like proximal outcomes are just like easier to predict. Like if you hate your boss, if you snap, you're like, okay, I'm out of here, right? I think it was Campion and Moretz had profiles and quitting. So there's like 4 different profiles and people that quit. Some people, like, you can't save them at all. Like they're going to go off to school, something like that. Some people have like a slow burn. Some people, like, there's like a snap judgment, like, their boss yells at them if they're out of there, this sort of stuff. Really interesting paper. But I think that like quitting is kind of like it's kind of like breaking up a relationship. You're like, I'm done. Okay, like you reach a point and you're like, I'm out of here. I'm looking for a new job.
Yeah. Well, I think Adam Grant has famously talked about the wisdom in finding the thing you thought you should find. Like, hey, proximal effects should affect things proximally, right? It would be weird if they didn't.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, do you want to move on to the last one about transmission of mental disorders?
Do you have time, Matt? A couple minutes?
Yeah, I can do a couple minutes.
Sweet. Transmission of mental disorders in adolescent peer networks. So previous research had indicated that mental disorders may be transmitted from one individual to another. Famously, the Christakis and Fowler Farmington studies, where they found like people being obese and happiness, etc., will flow through people. But it's never been carried out in like a large sample. So what they did is they took all Finnish citizens born between 1985 and 1997 for whom they had data. So 700,000 people, cohort members, whatever. And they assessed them in, I believe it was 9th grade. And the results show that having one or more diagnosed classmates in your class increased your risk by 5% for a later diagnosis. The most common or the most prevalent were mood, anxiety, and eating disorders. The risk was most pronounced in the first year follow-up. So you have like this like proximal effect. And there was also an effect of a dose-response relationship. So the higher the dose, the higher number of people in your class that were diagnosed with a mental disorder, the more likely the students were to also develop a mental disorder of the same type. Interesting stuff. So like,
well, it says they controlled for area level co-founders or confounders. Sorry.
They controlled for a lot in this study. Yeah.
Well, I wonder, like, it was like lead in the water controlled for, because I imagine if you're drinking the water and it has lead in it and you get a mental disorder, probably everyone else in the class is more likely to develop a mental disorder later on in life because the lead in the water there too.
They controlled, it was a Cox hazard model, but it was also a multi-level regression sort of formula that they worked out there. And they controlled for parents' incomes and education and all sorts of factors.
Yeah, but that problem you're alluding to, like the related literature I know that has the exact same problems is like social contagion of interest in entrepreneurship, which I've written about before. And so do people like, they find similar things, like if you have more coworkers who are ex-entrepreneurs, you're more likely to found a business yourself. And the big challenge in that research is maybe people who are, interested in entrepreneurship work at the same companies. Maybe they all just happen to work in an industry that is easier to start a business in, and that's why they all know each other. But the papers, I think, do a lot of interesting stuff. There's like actually a lot of different lines of evidence that I think shows that this like social contagion thing for entrepreneurship is like a real deal. And so I imagine you could do the same kinds of tricks there. Like they do everything from like randomly place people together with an entrepreneur versus another entrepreneur versus, so. I
mean, is this sort of like, are they positing it's like a placebo, nocebo effect where, you see somebody else experiencing something and just like because of the contagion of it, you experience it too, even if it might not be real?
Are you talking about adolescent mental illness or entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you also see what gets rewarded and what doesn't, right? Like, so if someone's like gets a lot of social attention, especially at that point, maybe you start seeing what gets rewarded as well. Well, one of the cooler studies I've seen is in their book Connected. Fowler and Kostakis show that the rate of back pain in East and West Germany, in West Germany, probably, I'm going to make up numbers, 20% of the people had back pain. East Germany, none. Wall falls down. All of a sudden, all those people in East Germany start developing back pain symptoms. Why? I mean, it's like a naturalistic experiment.
It's interesting. I think the thing you have to, and maybe they do this already, is like, you could imagine a thing where it's like, I didn't know that there was hope for back pain. I didn't know there was treatments for it. You know, I just lived with it. And then I meet these guys who have it and they're like, oh no, I went to the doctor. And then you go talk to your doctor and now you get clicked as also having back pain.
I can complain about this? Sweet.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought you were making like a pharmaceutical commercial. Like, is just your back hurt? Do you need like? Have you tried Exebo? You know, the helps with lower back pain, and that spread from West Germany to East Germany.
Well,
I think that clearly, like, the social contagion works, especially like a micro level. Like we've all experienced this situation. Like we're in a good mood, and like someone walks in and they just like kills the vibe. Yeah. Right, like they're mean as hell, or something like, oh Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a good way to end it.
Yeah, Matt. Like, I mean, meeting you today has been cool, and seeing your Substack, it's fantastic. You've clearly got a lot of interesting thoughts on a lot of topics, and I feel like I've already learned a lot from you. So, well, thanks for joining us today. Scott, any final words for Matt before we give him the final word?
Yeah, Matt, it's great to see you again. Tell folks how they can get in contact with you if they want to.
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky as Matt S. Clancy. There's my website, newthingsunderthesun.com. And then there's the Substack version, which I think is also mattsclancy.substack.com. But you just Google New Things Under the Sun or Matt Clancy and I'll probably pop up.
Repeat, New Things Under the Sun.
That's right.
New Things
Under the Sun.
My disclaimer is Scott told me the wrong name, so I apologize.
I did. It's all my fault.
It is kind of about, well, it's about all things innovation, I'd say, in science and technology. So
when you heard it here, Matt's an X and Blue Sky guy, but not a Threads guy, so you can't find him there. But
I think I do have a Threads account. I just never check it. So
yeah. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Colin Scott, and today's guest, Matt Clancy. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.